components of the cell membrane. So first, let's have a look at the purpose of a cell membrane. So first, it holds the parts of a cell together. So if this is our cell, all of the little organelles, the cytoplasm, everything inside the cell is held together by this cell membrane. It prevents damage from external environment. For example, in the nucleus, the nuclear envelope, its double plasma membrane, makes sure that the delicate genetic material inside the nucleus isn't harmed by any of the external materials and environments. It also regulates entry and exit of materials, so only certain materials can get in through the membranes or out. It also allows different environments inside and out of the cell, so different organelles and different cells can have different optimum environments for their enzymes to work. So now let's look at the components of a cell membrane. So first are the phospholipids. The phospholipids have a hydrophilic head and a hydrophobic tail. The hydrophilic head is its phosphate group, and the hydrophilic tail is the fatty acid. This forms a self-assembled phospholipid bilayer, and this is because when placed in an aqueous environment, the hydrophilic heads face towards the water, and the hydrophobic tails get as far away from the aqueous environment as possible, so form this bilayer where there's a hydrophobic environment between the hydrophilic heads. Phospholipids allow diffusion of lipid-soluble substances through the membrane, and this is because the substances must be soluble in lipids to be able to diffuse through this bilayer. And because of the self-assembled phospholipid bilayer, this means the membrane is flexible and self-healing. Because it's self-assembled, it naturally wants to be in this state, so when broken apart for some reason, it will heal itself. And it's flexible because the phospholipids are constantly in motion. Second, cholesterol. Cholesterol adds strength to the membrane. As you can see here, the cholesterol is in between the fatty acid chains. They're very hydrophobic, so cholesterol prevents loss of water and dissolved ions through the membrane. Cholesterol controls rigidity of the bilayer, so it means that it limits the lateral movement of the fatty acids and phospholipids. And this is very important in high temperatures because when the phospholipids get enough energy and start moving very quickly, the cholesterol is there to stop them from moving too far apart to create too big gaps in the phospholipid bilayer and let too much through the membrane. Next, probably one of the most important of the components are the proteins. So in the cell membrane, there are two types of proteins. The first are integral proteins, and integral proteins, like the ones on the right, span the entire width of the bilayer. The others are peripheral proteins, and these are proteins that don't span the whole width, but sit either on the top or the bottom of the membrane. And with integral proteins, the ones that span the entire width of the membrane, there are two types. Carrier proteins, the ones here, and channel proteins. Channel proteins are fluid-filled tubes that allow water-soluble substances to enter the membrane, and carrier proteins change their shape when attached to specific substances to allow them through into the membrane or out of the membrane. Proteins also add structural support, and they can act as cell recognition sites for specific chemicals and substances. They also adhere cells together, so they help cells stick together. And they can also act as receptors. So next is glycolipids. And as you can see on the right, this is the glycolipid, because glycolipids are carbohydrate chains covalently bonded to a lipid in the bilayer. And these carbohydrates extend into the aqueous environment around the cell. So this carbohydrate chain attached to this phospholipid is in the aqueous environment outside of the cell. And these glycolipids act as cell surface receptors for specific chemicals, for example, hormones or neurotransmitters. And this is important as this allows the cell to receive information from the rest of the body. Glycolipids also maintain the stability of the membrane by making hydrogen bonds with the water, because the carbohydrate chain extends into the aqueous environment, allowing it to make these hydrogen bonds. Glycolipids also help attach cells together to form tissues. Lastly is glycoproteins. And glycoproteins are carbohydrate chains bonded to proteins in the membrane. And these are usually attached to extrinsic or peripheral proteins. These glycoproteins also act as cell surface receptors for hormones and neurotransmitters, meaning that they're also very important in allowing the cells to gain information from the rest of the body. They also help cells adhere to form tissues, just like glycolipids. And lastly, they allow cells to recognize each other. And this is important in, let's say, lymphocytes, because if a cell has certain proteins, glycoproteins, on its cell membrane, these can be recognized by lymphocytes as their own body cells, so they don't see them as foreign pathogens, for example. So this means that the body does not attack its own cells because it recognizes them as the body's.